Hello, this is Shuyler Mao. Welcome to the Knicks Boots podcast from start to finish. I'm joined here by Nathan Cromer,
Hello, listener.
Grant Pemberton.
I think there's got to be more than one listener, so I'll say hello to the listeners.
Well, it's like the Dear Reader. It's like one.
Exactly.
Oh,
Speaking to the heart, directly to him.
Yeah.
my bad.
Did you ever read any Stephen King books?
Maybe just like Pet Sematary
Okay.
back in the day.
Yeah, he was a big Dear Reader guy.
Okay,
But it's like a literary convention.
gotcha. Okay, my
So
bad.
we'll transfer that over here to this
Okay.
format.
All right. Hello, reader.
Don't say my bad. It's not your fault.
Hello, viewer.
Well, thanks for coming here today, guys. Coming into work, really appreciate it. We're going to talk about developing a new boot model, and I think there's a couple different facets we can talk about. So we can talk about like the mock toe stitcher, where we're adding like an additional feature to what is, basically a similar build to what we already had with like the Builder Pro, for example, or the Traveler, effectively like an embellishment to the appearance. I think we can go farther and also talk about like, what is it like to develop a new pattern? We've got some experience there. Examples of that might include like the tactical boot, the Chelsea, the rope, the Western boot, and then now the Roper that's coming out. And then of course, I think we should start to talk about our new line, that we have coming out. I've teased it a little bit on Reddit, for example, where we have a high-end line coming out that's really trying to approach some of those, high levels of finishing, maybe not higher quality materials, but more refined materials. I think would be one way to put it, and really kind of replicate like that fashion experience that people have. Like you look at people who buy $1,000 Gucci's or $1,000 designer brands, and the footwear itself is not actually that high quality. Like it's designed, I think, in an interesting way is probably the priority there. But isn't necessarily going to hold up for you over a long period of time.
Right.
And so we're just trying to have something that does have that similar design cachet, but also something that's kind of built for life, just like our standard Knicks offerings. So with that said, Grant, maybe you'll start with this one. How does the process begin? We'll start from the top.
Well, I think it's usually customers. Why don't you have this thing? And we look at what that thing is, and I think mock toes were, that this would be like a design enhancement or a cosmetic enhancement, but we just have to look at what's kind of the total available market. Are there lots of people that just buy mock toes? And if the answer is, yes, then we start looking at equipment, and then we start looking at, the right equipment. We start looking at other companies that do it, and we start looking at how they do it. And then it's really about how do we do it? How do we do it better? And how do we do it in a way that matches our brand, So I think Nathan was really key on the mock toe. And why don't you tell us about what we learned shopping for equipment?
Yeah. So the next step in the process is we start asking around to vendors, suppliers, some of the machine salesmen here in the leather industry, and figure out like what's even available out there. Some people are still sewing mock toes by hand. I don't know if that's the best way for the worker or, if it actually adds that much value. Some people love it, some people don't, so it definitely comes down to like defining what do we want it to be. We actually spoke pretty extensively and came to the conclusion that like a pleated mock toe is the way to go. So instead of cutting the leather, having two separate pieces, traditionally be called like a plug, in which sews in.
Like a moccasin kind of, right?
Exactly, yeah. So instead of doing that, it's actually a one-piece vamp that has a pleat line that gathers the leather with a round needle stitcher. So we came to that not only because we thought it's the most functional, probably the most durable construction. Even if on a job site a razor blade cuts your stitch, your boot's not coming apart. Your vamp is still holding together because it's still a single piece of leather.
And better water resistance as well.
Yes. So many good features of it, while still giving people those wonderful aesthetic mock toes. So functionally, it was kind of a no-brainer. Then we started testing in the machine world, sent off vamps to be tested on a couple different machines. One got tested, or a couple vamps got tested at a Red Wing factory, and that machine, I think a lot of I don't know if they have any pleated mock toes, so it might have been the best they could do, but their machines just couldn't handle our thickness of leather. So it's kind of a unique challenge that we seem to face here, is that like we're unashamedly 7 to 8 ounce leather, and it's durable, and we think it's worthwhile doing that. So our machines have to meet specs. So we ended up finding the right machine, found the right construction method, and it kind of brought us to patterning.
Thank you, Nathan. I appreciate that. And Grant, why don't you talk about like maybe the Chelsea or a different pattern, or the tactical?
Yeah, I think I'd put those both in two different categories. Tactical is, hey, I wonder if we can modify our existing pattern to get a 360 stitch. Chelsea would be like, hey, let's do something completely new. I think for tactical, where did the 360 stitch originate? I think
it was a lot of water cooler discussion between you and I.
Yeah, I think it was, how do we seal this thing up? The 270 stitch seals up the vamp so well. And I think I just got tired of looking at boots where potentially water was kind of coming in under the heel counter into the midsole. And then, when you tear boots apart, you do see that there's moisture and rust. And so we just started thinking, how do we seal this thing up? For many years, I would tell people our boots aren't great in water. And they're just, if you're going to be in water, we don't recommend nicks. And I think I just got tired of saying that. Similar to mock toes. Like, oh, we just don't do mock toes. We're not a Midwest brand.
Right.
It's like, then you hire somebody from the Midwest and you're just like, you're an idiot. You should do mock toes. So I think similarly, we, I was just like, I get tired of telling people, no, we don't do that. And I was like, it's a perfectly reasonable, requirement. Yeah. So we just started experimenting with, doing a taller or longer heel counter, flaring it out, making sure that the side seam between the vamp and the heel counter matched up. And then we started going a bit further, like, can we start stripping out maybe some of the leather layers that don't do well in water? And the tactical / water work, was born. Obviously, looking at what's on the market, I think we started out with the non kind of squared off counter. And I think we decided like, no, it needs to be tactical. It needs a little flair to it. So that's where we kind of shaved the corner off, or we took the round heel counter and sharpened it a bit to give it a different look. So I think the patterning of that was fairly easy, but the development of kind of swapping out some of the leather for the rubber and testing that was a pretty long process.
So with all that said, like, I don't know, what are you first looking for when you're designing the boot?
Well, I think there's a lot of existing patterns and models out there. So it's really, how do we take a pattern and how do we make it work with the way that we make boots, and we're primarily a stitch down boot company. So there's a lot of patterning out there that's not for stitch down. So we have to evaluate, how do we morph this pattern, to be stitched down. I think we're cognizant of, once it's done, how do we still make it look like a Knicks boot? How do we maintain some of the features of our Builder Pro, Urban Loggers, Hot Shots, so it's not something that's completely different? But I think we're starting to push that envelope a little bit. I think of just like, maybe it's okay to do something completely different. I tend to play it a little bit more safely and say, I want the existing market and I want the new market. So it still looks like a Knicks. But I think with some of these bigger projects we're looking at, like Shuyler alluded to, it's okay to do something completely different. And that at that point, it's more about drawing in a new audience versus your existing customers. So But yeah, it's got to be. I think the big thing people don't appreciate is we've got hands that have built essentially the same boot over and over for decades. How do you take something that looks great and say, let's make that? There's a lot that has to be considered, especially from the operators, and that takes a long time to build trust there, and then get the right machinery. With the Chelsea, like it's a whole different grading that we've used, so the grading or the sizing doesn't line up with our existing like logger pattern. So there was a whole learning curve there where they're using a different chart. But I think we're getting smarter about it, which is fun. We're actually maybe using less dyes than we have on other patterns, just because you realize that there's more overlap. And a lot of this is computer modeled, which is a new thing. So that takes the guesswork out of a lot of it. I remember in the old days, it was like there was no computer modeling. And so you would trace it, add a little more, and you'd be sending 20 or 30 boots through production to make sure that your lasting tolerances were right. Where now, like, lasting tolerances can be calculated into the software if you know what last you're using, and all the guesswork. I would just say it expedites the process a bit.
It's a lot quicker.
Yeah.
So I think I like to think that we have to make something that looks great on a website.
Yeah.
With some of the things coming up, I think we got to make it pop. Man, it's got to look like an awesome shoe and something that people will want to purchase. Also, I think another thing we could talk about is like leather. So, let's talk about this, like the process of visiting suppliers and assessing leather samples. So we went through a pretty robust development process on kind of our 1964 versus the Maxaport. That took quite a few rounds of sampling to get that right. That's often, what it takes. I think like if you can go out there in person, that does save some steps there. And then often like, we are fortunate with the manual component of our boot making that we have a little more flexibility in the types of leathers that we can work with.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes it comes down to like what looks great and what do we think will, pull up nicely as it gets kind of stretched across the last. I think if we were like sourcing globally and like trying to find like the lowest dollar, lowest denominator, then that would be a bigger thing. That's a big thing for some of the really big brands. If you think of like the testing that they go through. I know that Seidel has a really robust waterproof testing component, and a lot of that's because of Danner. Because they have these really high standards, and it's kind of cool to be in that same company.
Yeah, we just sent boots out for NFPA testing, and it has to pass a cut resistance test, and so it's not like anything goes. Things have to be tested, and we're getting better at our testing too, which I think is so that plays into soles now. Safety toes, back in the old days, you can cobble it together, so to speak, and make it work. But I think now, like, there's a big emphasis on making sure that it actually meets some sort of standard and
actually certified, right?
Yep.
And we're one of the few that are really certifying some of this stuff, which we're learning a lot through that too.
Yeah, I would agree. Like EH testing recently, we do the legwork and make sure that it does qualify and work with those laboratories to to get those certificates and make sure that they actually qualify. Talk about maybe some specific instances or some common obstacles that you face when you're kind of translating that new design into actual production, into the actual boot making process.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like kind of in the same vein as Grant said, like back, even a couple years ago, prior to things being more digitized for us, like it was a lot of trial and error. And so I think something some people don't realize, I didn't realize at first when I got here, is that different leathers stretch differently, last differently, sew differently, and pull differently, and so it's like every step of the process could have some little tweaks that have to be made. And so, especially mock toes early on, as we were sewing them, like you could use the same pattern, for a 9D on 2 different boots, but 2 different leathers last differently. And so one could pull further down the toe, one couldn't have enough toe length. And so, I think our sewers do an amazing job now. Our mock toes are all super consistent, but, we had to iron it out. Yep. It just takes experience on some of that stuff.
We've pulled leathers from like mock toe options. Yeah. We've pulled lasts from options. And that's because like we tested a sampling and it went through great. And then we're like, we don't have a good mock toe pattern for this size or this leather. And production's like, what do you want to do here? And so we have to make a decision of like, maybe a mock toe on a 67 is not a good idea. It doesn't look good. It's hard to last, and those are things that I think we try to be diligent about. But so one embarrassing thing was like during the development cycle of the Chelsea, I didn't realize how much strain would be put on the elastic when we took the boots off the last. And
in the development cycle.
Yeah.
Before they went into production.
That's right. In the development cycle. Yeah. And so, the first few that went through when we were prototyping, I was like, wow, that puts a lot of stress on the elastic. Something I'd never thought through because we've never put elastic in boots. So we had to develop a tool to actually pull the last out of the boot without damaging the elastic. And those are just, things you don't always think through. But that's the importance of making it and prototyping and learning and talking to the operators and the boot makers to make sure that you're covering all your bases. And so there's just a lot of things I think with like brand new patterns. And we're learning a lot as we're getting into these Western pull-on boots. Like, it's almost a different discipline when you're going from lace-up kind of logger style, our patterns to new patterns. There's just a learning curve that is, and I got to put myself in the position of the people making the boots, because when you if it's a lot of it's muscle memory, and now you're saying, let's try this. A lot of it is just readjusting some of the tooling, the mindset, and it can get, it can get frustrating at times because it is completely new, And so a lot of it's just like, how do we introduce something, so I think we're doing a better job of like, let's get production's input on it. How do we make this easier? Is this doable? And a lot of times they're like, that's not doable. Like, we're not going to do that because it's not going to work or it's not going to look right. So we troubleshoot through those things,
What quality control measures do we have in place to ensure the boots meet our high standards? I'll take this one.
Yeah.
Are you sure?
I'm sure.
Okay.
Yes.
Right.
So, we've always evaluated boots as they go through the process, from lasting to bottoming to stitching, et cetera. And I think it's been a visual inspection. A recent thing that we're doing is we're actually including the tag that is signed off on by each step in the production process as kind of just an assurance to the end user that like this was checked at each step of the way and did meet standards at each interval. I think that's a cool thing, and you can kind of you see the initials of everyone who worked on your boot, and that's a relatively recent thing where we're sending those along. And I don't know, it's an interesting way to kind of share the production process, I think, and like what all goes into it with the customer, and really celebrate all those different steps and the handmade approach that we have to the boots. So I hope people appreciate that and notice that and think it's a cool thing.
Yeah, I've been seeing it a lot on the forums and even YouTube. A guy did a video, and there it was, and he commented on it, and he was like, "This is so cool that like I can actually see all the initials." And so yeah, I think it's really positive. I think it brings some confidence to the customer.
Yep. I'm not aware of anyone else that does that. So cool thing. Absolutely. Nathan, what do you find most rewarding about the boot making process? I know, you're not exactly out there on the floor, but you've done a number of the tasks, especially in kind of making some of these prototypes and on the video side.
Sure.
What do you like about it?
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably speak to the process as a whole. Like, I of all the things, I definitely like watching lasting the most. It's, it's the taking form, taking the shape of the boot. But yeah, I think like just seeing and hearing the process every day is really cool. Like coming into the office and we don't really have a door between production and sales, and so all of that sound comes right down the hallway, and we get to hear it every day. And it's a daily reminder that, like, these are made by hand. It's made the old way.
Yeah.
And people put a lot of work into these boots. There's a lot of pride, a lot of effort put into this product, and I mean, it's one of the reasons I love working here. Is
Cool.
I get to hear that, I get to see that, and it's the same process. It's the same quality of product. For the last couple of years, in which I've been able to see. I love it.
Grant, do you have anything to add?
I think it's, I like new things. I think I like pushing the envelope. I think I said earlier, like I don't want to dilute the brand, but anytime I see there's an opportunity for us to make something better in a vertical, I'm like, let's do it, So I think there's a lot of reward in going after new markets, and then just kind of knowing that the materials and the craftsmanship we put into it, is a real top tier product in that space where maybe one didn't exist before. I think there's a lot of reward in that. The tactical boot would be an example. The tactical boots kind of hover around X price range with X type of materials. And I think for us to be able to be like, no, I think there should be a better one out in the market, and tons of people have them now, and they're just like, it's way better, than my kind of government issued boot. And I'm so glad that, Nix cares about military personnel and law enforcement. And so I think there's a lot of, a lot of reward in that. I mean, we're solving a problem for so many people. Like, that's super rewarding.
Yeah.
I can't imagine, like,
Right.
I always talk about being in, like, no offense to people in, like, insurance sales,
You have a brother-in-law in that, don't you?
What's that? No. I have brother-in-laws and other things, but I don't know. Like, for me, it's like we're actually there's a ton of very positive comments of like, you make my life better because you guys make these things, and like that's super rewarding. Where, like, I don't know, in the insurance space, I'm sure you get one or two like calls a day and just be like, thank you so much for selling me that insurance. Like, you've changed my life. In our space, like, there's a lot of really good sentiment out there, which is fun.
How do you see the future of boot making evolving, considering technology advancements,
Do you want to talk about the AI robots?
changing
Yeah.
consumer preferences?
Yeah, our AI created boot line. It's just it's all of our processes take skill. I could see some of the some of the processes that probably are better automated, or like hammer hits from time to time. Like, some machines could take out unnecessary things, like sole presses, for example. As you advance the technology for that, and something that somebody had to use a hammer to compress together, you can now use hydraulics for. So I think taking out some of the strain of processes in which traditionally, turn of the century, we're taxing on a person. We do a lot better with now, and we're going to continue to do that for our workers, and to keep handmade boots sustainable.
Yeah, I know one of the issues we've had with there are pretty advanced machines out there for making shoes, but we've always struggled with having the materials work with them because they're really designed for lesser stuff, right? That's we can't compromise on that. I've gone out to some places and we tell them the specs on what we have, and they're like, oh, no way, sorry, that can't help. But that's a cool thing. It's why our boots are special and unique, in the footwear world.
I think the cool thing is most people need shoes, so it's a big market.
Yeah.
And I think that the consumer now has the opportunity to kind of choose how their boots are made, what technology. I mean, you've got everywhere from, $2,500 super bespoke to 3D printed shoes now. And so, I mean, I think, I don't think like 3D printing ends, the footwear industry. If anything, it makes handmade boots more novel. And so it's interesting to think through, like, the consumer now can choose their price point. They can choose how it's made. They can choose where it's made. And, I think that's where in the past it was just, shoes are shoes maybe, or boots are boots. And now it's like that's maybe not the case for those that are kind of doing their homework,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. A lot more transparency online leads to more informed buyers. People like ethical products, people like quality products.
Yeah.
And, I think that's one of the benefits to our YouTube channel. Some of the success of that has just been people catching vision of how the product's made and, getting behind that.
Yeah, there's a lot of heart and soul that goes into each boot. Yeah. That's for sure. And Nathan, you do a great job displaying that on the media channels that we have, and Grant, wonderful job and kind of coming up with what fits the processes that we have, and also is appealing to the consumer and makes them want to click buy on a pretty big purchase that many years 10 20 years ago would never have been considered. So really impressive work, you guys. So thanks so much for your time, guys, and thanks again to the audience for listening. Kelsey, you were great as usual.
Thank you, Kelsey.
Kelsey, we're going to have to get you a mic. All right. Listeners, thank you so much for sticking around this long. We really appreciate it. We hope you will leave us a rating and review if you enjoyed the show. Help us get the word out. For anyone who's stuck around till the end, please use code NEWBOOT10, NEWBOOT10, NEWBOOT10 for 10% off at the store for a limited time. So thanks again for listening, guys. We'll talk to you later and see you in a week. Hope you have a great day. Bye.
Bye.